I hope that in my small way I could perhaps start a good conversation and an in-depth discussion when it comes to human rights in the Philippines and the anti-imperialist struggle there.
AK Guillen is a Filipino human rights defender and a member of the National Union of People's Lawyers, the NUPL. Despite surviving a near-fatal attack, Guillen has continued his work as an NUPL lawyer, human rights defender, and advocate. So let's give a hand to AK Guillen.
So one of the first questions that we have is why do you think the situation in the Philippines might be more urgent than it was maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Or how do you see it different than it was then?
Well, it's certainly more urgent for two reasons mainly. One, the task force that has been created by the Duterte government, the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, which is responsible for the red tagging of activists and human rights defenders. And the campaign of red tagging has resulted in the commission of grave human rights violations. This task force is still in place, and its budget has also increased. So you have a lot of the policies that were crafted under the Duterte administration still being implemented under the administration of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And it's equally dangerous, if not even more so, for activists now in the Philippines because of the continuing attacks and threats against them. And the other reason that the situation may be more urgent is because there's little knowledge within the international community about what is happening right now in the Philippines. There seems to be this mistaken conception that the situation in the Philippines is improving, but unfortunately it is not, and it is part of our campaign now to send a message to the international community that the human rights situation in the Philippines is worsening for activists and human rights defenders. What is new with the NTF-ELCA is that it empowers the government to crack down on civil society. And that is what we have been seeing in the Philippines, especially since 2018. One example of this is the police getting search warrants from courts and then using these search warrants to justify a large-scale operation that involved raids into the homes of activists and community leaders. And in these raids, they kill their intended targets. In fact, what happens after these massacres take place is that the police conduct an investigation. It is the police that leads the operation, and then they conduct an investigation of their own operatives. And then, in the case of the Tumandok massacre, 6 months later, they put out a statement saying that there is no sign of foul play. All of the operatives are cleared, and nobody will get prosecuted.
What do you want to make sure our kababayan or people in the United States walk away with from this tour?
The idea that impunity in the Philippines cannot continue. It must be addressed because of the hundreds of human rights defenders, activists, environmental defenders, and land reform advocates that were killed under the Duterte administration. There has been no accountability in those cases. And while the government is trying to present the image of the human rights situation improving, the reality on the ground is the exact opposite. And because of the lack of cases being filed against any of the perpetrators, because of the lack of any impartial and genuine investigation into these cases of extrajudicial killings, torture, enforced disappearances, and arbitrary arrests, there is a culture of impunity that permeates the country, and there is a climate of fear that exists. So we wish that our fellow Filipinos in the United States and in other countries as well would support our campaign in bringing pressure to the Philippine government to cease its campaign of persecution against human rights activists and advocates, and to stop its policy of red tagging. That lack of accountability creates a climate of fear, not just among the communities that have been targeted, but activists and human rights defenders as well. And the attacks do not stop with the massacres and the extrajudicial killings. There are subsequent threats and attacks against the families and the communities even after the operation. So for example, after the Tumandok massacre in December of 2020, we went in, we provided legal services for the families of the victims and some of the persons arrested. A month later, just as we were preparing for trial, one of our key witnesses, potential witnesses, was killed. He was assassinated as he was going home. And then 4 days later, I was the one who was subjected to an attack. So as I was going home from the office, two men chased me down, and they had two other accomplices with getaway vehicles, motorcycles, and I was repeatedly stabbed in the neck, in the back, and in the head. Now, fortunately, I survived that incident, and as you can see, it has left no permanent damage, save for the trauma, of course. But you could just imagine the impact it has for human rights defenders and human rights lawyers, including members of the National Union of People's Lawyers. Other members of NUPL have also been killed since that particular attack against me, and many of our paralegals have also been targeted. So we're hoping to conduct a strong advocacy campaign to bring the world's attention to these continuing attacks against human rights defenders, especially lawyers, paralegals, and the members of the different organizations we work with. And I guess one call that we would have for activists here in the United States as well as in other countries is that they should not turn a blind eye to what is happening in the Philippines. They should not stay silent. There are a lot of campaigns that we could engage in order to bring the atrocities to an end. But the first step should really be to speak out about what is happening.
What gives you that courage and determination to continue to struggle against these human rights violations?
Knowing that I have colleagues with me who are joining me in this struggle, despite the dangers that we are facing. I am not the only victim. I have other individuals standing with me who have shared the same experiences, who have been in jail who have experienced arrest and faced trumped up charges. I have the families of our colleagues who were killed. They still support us. They believe in the work that we do, and that gives me and everyone else in our organization inspiration to continue. And we know that we are in the right. We know that we stand for truth and justice, and we know that in the end we will overcome the challenges that we are facing today.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Why do they call us terrorists? Is it because we side with the oppressed, or because we unmask the thieves and robbers who steal from us? Is it because we resist the foreign monsters who continue to enslave us? Why do they call us terrorists? Is it because we care for the sick and wounded, plant crops and trees, teach the children? Or is it because we fight for justice, distribute free land, and organize the people to build their own strength? Then call us terrorists if you may, but grant us the chance to do what we are meant to do, to serve the people to the very end until the terror of greed is effaced and plunder is brought to an end, until we cease to fight each other and are equal, fair, and trust, until we can call each other by one true name, comrades.
One question that I also wanted to ask, especially, we're seeing that Marcos is returning back to the United States to meet with Biden on May 1st, which is such an interesting day to be coming to the United States. The last time he came here was on the 50th anniversary of martial law in the Philippines. So I was wondering if you could talk about what you think about Marcos's visit to the United States to meet with Biden.
Well, it's unfortunate that the United States is hosting the Philippine president. His family has a record of responsibility for grave human rights violations in the Philippines. That period, when they were in control of the country, was also the worst period for the Filipino people as well. And the United States is, in a way, similarly responsible for many of the problems being faced by Filipinos because of the support that they are giving, not just the Marcos administration, but previous administrations as well, in the form of military aid. And through the creation of these defense agreements that allow the US government, the US military in particular, to supply weapons and train soldiers from the Philippines. And unfortunately, that training and these weapons are being used against the Filipino people. So we hope that the international community would recognize its responsibility when it comes to calling out these violations in the Philippines. It is imperative that human rights organizations and advocates in the United States and in other countries call out the Philippine government and the Philippine president for its worsening record of human rights violations.
Are you able to speak a little bit about the political prisoner situation in the Philippines?
There are hundreds of prisoners or detainees in the Philippines who are in jail, not because of any criminal activity that they engaged in, but because of their political work, their political beliefs, and their advocacies. And it is very difficult because Philippine jails are notorious for subhuman conditions. The Philippine legal system is also notorious for the extremely slow proceedings involved in these cases. And a person who is in jail for trumped-up charges, even if he or she gets acquitted later on, he could spend years, even decades, behind bars during the pendency of the trial or the appeals process. And there's very little budget for political prisoners. Many of the political prisoners under the Duterte administration and even under the Marcos administration do not have access to sufficient funds for food and other personal needs. Some political prisoners have died in prison during the pendency of their cases. And we see these things as a miscarriage of justice. It should not be the obligation of political prisoners to prove that they are innocent. Rather, it is the obligation of the state to prove that there is wrongdoing on their part. And it should do so in a quick, in a timely manner, instead of the system that we have now, where people have to spend years behind bars just to get their cases heard. So we continue to advocate for greater support for our political prisoners in different ways, particularly through the provision of resources and also campaigning for their immediate release, because these are people, again, who are in jail mainly because of their beliefs and their advocacies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's all we have for today. So thank you for being here, Attorney AK. We're so grateful to have you here in Chicago.
Thank you for taking the time.